what we are going to see in the following will be nothing artistic and is entirely the opposite of high art if we do this kind of definition. So, and also before presenting my paper, allow me to read a disclaimer. So first of all, I have never seen a real living polar bear in person throughout my life. The closest encounter I have with a real polar bear is a taxidermy in a private museum in Paris. So that is this one. And I feel like we have some kind of eye contact, but I'm not really sure this kind of thing. So that relates to this issue of spectatorship, which I think is also connecting to Michael's presentation just now. However, I feel like I have known this species. And this feeling of familiarity is explained through my ordinary encounter of these images. And obviously, the sense of familiarity is culturally contextualized. Representations of polar bears are very commonly seen in everyday life, through stationery, scarf, TV advertisement, decoration at shopping mall, different consumers product in Hong Kong and in many other Asian countries. So these are the pictures that I take every day. Whenever I bump into something relating to a polar bear, I take a picture, and it's really like I'm a holder of polar bear images. Polar bears have been one of our favorite animals since we were small. When I say our favorite animals, I do not mean that we have sufficient knowledge about this animal species, how they live on our planet, their behavior, etc. We just like them in their visual forms. The remoteness of polar bears' natural habitat and their out-of-sightness contrasts with the fact that they are often mediated as varieties of images with changing meanings over time and context. I could safely state that very likely the following presentation is up to a lot of flaws, messiness, understanding, chaos, just disjunctions and impotence is just like how the Anthropocene works. The meanings of reading out disclaimer, if I may put it honestly, is not only acting responsible by explaining a few cautious remarks or additional anecdotes to contextualize the discussion, but to avoid responsibility and requesting an understanding, if not forgiveness, of a certain negligence and inadequate knowledge of the topic. A disclaimer is a negation of information as it is presented. A disclaimer is the denial of a claim, a disavowal of responsibility through a responsible statement. I find this paradox quite pertinent is describing the way in which we respond to the Anthropocene. Speaking of disclaimer, one common disclaimer we have all encountered is this statement before watching a film. And despite the statement's attempts to highlight the disconnection between diegetic reality and the true reality, the standard disclaimer quite often leaves us thinking that the fictitious or fictional elements could be real by a deliberate denial of this connection. Another common content disclaimer is about images and contents that are relating to certain people's opinion, just like this one. I'm sure this kind of disclaimers will be increasingly found, negotiated and interrogated in the discussions of environmental ethics that deals with facts, data, statistics, graphs, and maps in narrative materials. I'm explaining in such a great details about the use of disclaimer as well as the paradoxical nature, because you will see that this presentation is based on a couple of images as well as set of visualizing systems that demonstrate how image circulates around the globe in a limited, if not paradoxical way, to produce and narrate opinions, feelings, non-feelings, actions, and impacts relating to interspecies relationship in the context of climate change. There are questions of mediation, communications, and the extent to which messages are effectively mediated. The simplified version of this question is, what is the role of animal images in defining and contributing to this common epoch called the Anthropocene through their production, circulation, and reception in the technosphere? Ever since the Industrial Revolution, where the expansion of capitalism accelerates the speed of production and consumption of objects, ideas, identities, and feelings, leading to human beings' transformation from biological beings to geological agents, or even geological force that exercise impacts on the ecological changes on Earth, generating crisis, risk, and even dangers at different levels of life and chemical reactions. It seems that we do need disclaimers to justify human actions. However, to whom is this disclaimer for? Can we read our disclaimers to nature? Can we read our disclaimers to soil, grass, air, dust, rain, and sunshine? And what needs to be disclaimed? In the age where scientific data are subject to discursive articulation, narrative constructs, and somehow autonomous computerized circulation. So how do scholars who engage in truth instead of facts and data, such as every one of us in humanities, positions the impact in the multifarious debates about issues connecting to the Anthropocene? As Sean Kubert said, that, quote, the purpose of data is neither to know nor to picture, but to manage and predict, end quote. The transformation of lens, skill, and knowledge into data, such as map, bookkeeping, and database, is a process of enclosure from the worlds, leading to the humans into being worldless. In a similar line of critical perspective, when explaining the notion of the Anthropocene, Bernard Stiegler states that, quote, the Anthropocene is an Anthropocene, that is, a period in which entropy is produced on a massive scale, thanks precisely to the fact that what has been liquidated and automated is knowledge, so that in fact it is no longer knowledge at all, but rather a set of closed systems, that is, entropic systems. Knowledge is an open system. It always includes a capacity for disautomatization that produces negantropy. So there seems to be a consensus among scholars that responsibilities can no longer be negated, just like Stiegler's. We have been thinking of methods, gestures, and actions to tell stories that can mediate responsibilities instead of disclaimers in various scales. We have also been trying to make sense of the mutual reinforcement of affective entanglement and affective apathy where mediation takes place. In this paper, I took Jody Berlin's borrowing of Beckett Jamison's idea of vanishing mediator in thinking of what is being generated and degenerated in the emerging pattern relating to animal mediations. According to Jody Berlin, quote, understanding animals as mediators in the interplay between digital machines and reconfigured humans in different form is different from viewing animals as the content being transmitted in that media. Taking up the insights that an animal is a medium and the medium is the message means acknowledging that thinking about animals in the context of mediation is not just important for our consideration of human-animal relations. It expands our understandings of mediation itself. Burden continues that this doesn't mean that animals are always mediators, willing or otherwise, but to acknowledge that media are in the middle. Their definition is a matter of position, such that the status of something as a medium can fade once the position shifts. So here comes my current project originating from several sets of internet images about different polar bears who have struck people's attention in the age of Anthropocene. Through producing and looking at these images, human beings are not only significant agents of massive destruction and minor damages in various environments, but also powerless mediators and narrators. Starting off from these grisly images seen and to be seen, this paper attempts to investigate how the place of affect and indifference, action and inertia, and the curing and the infectious have allowed us to rethink the ecological disconnection or connection between medium and agency when the iceberg is melting on the plastic wasteland. In the study of the linkages between the digital media and environmental degradation, Sean Kubert reminds us that if the Earth's resources are finite, so is the media. He argues that ecological crisis is not the fault of individuals, but of the communicative systems, and the problem lies at overproduction. Through outlining the diagrams of material flows of finite media, he tells us that the current condition of environmental communication is that which is defined by alienation and repression. I agree with Kubert's thesis about the urgency of communication, the recognition of material processes that occur in mediation, and that ecology ought to be understood as mediation through an eco-political media aesthetics. And what I see in the case of polar bears is a possibility of rethinking how we can disorient and reorient our use of media by acknowledging our effective responses to images to the aim of generating a populist environmental politics that demands better ways of living and being. To me and people from tropical regions, polar bears are mystical creatures that exist in reality, but somewhere away of sight, and they will soon be gone under the recent ecological narrative about the correlation of polar bear survival and the increasingly retreating sea ice because of global warming. In other words, imaginations of the end and speculation of extinctions are mediated through the predictive invisibility of the species. At the same time, polar bears are highly visualized in everyday context, as I have shown you at the beginning. Here are a few categories to understand how polar bears are mediated between the invisible and the viral in the age of digitalization, the rise of social network, and the growth of ubiquitous interactive screens. So the first one is what I just shown you at the beginning of the representations of polar bears in popular culture, especially or among consumers objects, such as in Asian context. Actually, I have the IKEA one as well. So there's a corner in IKEA where there's all of polar bear things stacking up together, which is really fascinating. Second is the visualization of polar bears in wildlife photography. So it's an award-winning one by a French photographer. It's quite unlike what we have been expected. We see a very tiny polar bear in the end to see the scale of the landscape and the impact of something about the environment. And the third kind is the tracking of polar bears through visual technologies like drones, live cameras, and tracking devices, where you can find this polar bear tracking mapping of them on internet. It's live streaming. It's really fascinating that you see on live where a certain polar bear like this one called Daphne is moving around somewhere on the earth while you're watching her at the same time. I think this kind of tracking is trying to avoid polar bears being out of sight and to include and position polar bears in our environment on one hand, and on the other hand is to visualize their footprints while also reducing hours. And the fourth type is the circulation of polar bear images on social media. So these are some of the stickers that I will be receiving from some of my students. From personal to the public aspects, some of them are really pedagogical. Some of them are like generating enchantment. Some of them are acting for communications or miscommunications. Polar bears are especially dear to those of us who live in the tropical or subtropical regions because of the representations have been relating to the disseminations of coolness, cuteness, peace, and ease. The use of pastel colors like light blue, sky blue, and white narrates an assumption of innocence and purity that are highly remedial to the urban dwellers who are stressed out by hot weather and intensity of work, just like what we are now experiencing. From Coca-Cola to cute-looking stationery, cushions, and stuffed toys, the seeking of refuge from an imaginary slow life when one was small is also a means to seek the therapeutic, the restorative, the feeling good, or what in Chinese called 治愈, a popular adjective that connotes an affect of cure, the soothing ambience, the desire of healing, and the avoidance of suffering. It is a response to the sprawling neoliberal society where the stressful enclosure at workplace and the ease of convenience coexist in an unsettling manner. The therapeutic effect elicited through the image of polar bear is also informed by the way in which our general perception or knowledge about polar bears is relating to their freezing habitat in the Arctic Circle. Today, as we are taking up and absorbing the consequences of global warming, such as the unusual continuous hot weather in Hong Kong these days, I believe seeing the images of a polar bear will probably generate a feeling of coolness among us, comfort and ease from the sunburn or whatever hot and humid weather we experience. But one of the most prominent commercialized images of the polar bear as the ambassador of coolness is the advertisement of Hitachi air conditioner. So a big kitschy irony of having a polar bear being the spokesperson of a machine that likely contributes to global warming through the emission of carbon dioxide, a process that endangers and victimizes the polar bears themselves. If the North Pole is the front line of global warming, then the polar bear will be the myth of this embodiment. Parallel to the air conditioning icon, the polar bear is also the mascot for climate change and natural conservation. So when World Wide Fund calls polar bears the charismatic icon of the Arctic environment, the parallel circulation of the two types of polar bear images elicits schizophrenic responses, affectively empathetic and affectively apathetic at the same time. I would call that an ecological pharmacon that does not only embody the cure and the poison, but also the intermingling of the empathetic and the apathetic. It is a slippery affective response to the paradoxical images that renders it so difficult to communicate environmental messages. Through the image of the enigmatic polar bear in various mediations, climate change is further articulated as myth or obsolete science by the climate change deniers. While the cute polar bears are casting their spell on the beastly creature through an exaggeration of its snowy color, fluffy texture, roundedness in body shape, and slow movement that signifies laziness and relaxation, we do need to examine what this cute response means in relation to the images of the real polar bear somewhere out of sight. If overconsumption and overproductions are origins of the anthropogenic problems of accumulation through using up a finite stock of energy resources, which I'm borrowing from Sean Kubert as well, I would add that there is also an affective dimension of intensive comfortable fatigue known as hyper-enchantment or over-enchantment, something I invent. When energy resources such as images have massively circulated, mediated, and perceived to the extent that it becomes viral. The viral is infectious with a connotation of insanity and madness, actions that cannot be explained easily by rational means. Initially, the notion of enchantment is mostly relating to the therapeutic. When Bruno Bettelheim defines the fantastical enchantment is related to the nurturing fantastical elements in fairy tales, such as successful adventure as an enchanting presumption of life. Enchantment is relating to the fascination, insight, and dispelling of fear. And according to Jane Bennett, when wonder and fascination cohabit with realism and fear, enchantment is a real possibility. Enchantment, as Jane Bennett states, quote, is a mood of lively and intense engagement with the world, end quote. And she has been trying to think about how it plays with an ethical comportment of generosity towards others. Seemingly, enchantment is a positive life force that would offer a connective means to life. Hyper-enchantment is, however, the condition under which the soothing, the energizing experience of enchantment is out of control, in excess, resulting in a state of fatigue and numbness. There is a fine line between calmness and numbness. Mindfulness, when it becomes excessive and enclosing instead of inclusive, will lead to apathy. The coolness expressed by popular images of the polar bear fails to connect one of the polar bear's urge to keep cool in the Arctic Circle, and yet we feel good and comfortable about seeing and spreading the coolness. The means of connection becomes disconnections, and we feel connected, but we are not. So here comes this kind of definition of apathy, which meaning is originally freedom from suffering, passionless existence, or impassibility. The word apathy was originally a positive quality referring to the state of calmness, a spiritual attitude with heartlessness, peace of mind, detachment, etc. And nowadays, apathy becomes a derogative term that signifies the depressing state of giving up, losing a sense of worth because things no longer matter and one does not care. The shift of meaning could be a response to the awareness of one's helplessness and powerlessness to processes that are too gigantic to intervene and change. And here's another citation talking about apathy by Nina Ilyasov. So the polar bear remains one of the least studied carnivores on Earth until in recent years. And we go back to this elementary introduction by showing you a definition of what polar bear is. We have so many different kinds of definitions here. And the polar bear is the largest carnivores, and they could be an extremely dangerous one to humans on Earth. And all these debates about the survival of polar bears are relating to the controversies about climate change, when there are opposite opinions among environmentalists, scientists, politicians from different camps, and the native Inuit people. And the animal itself often escapes assumptions and speculations. The polar bear confounds the many assumptions people have hold of it. It is a cultural and biological paradox, which actually you can check out very easily. So the polar bear, with this background knowledge, it is understandably shocked and puzzled the globe several years ago when a series of images and videos about a captive polar bear was virally circulated online. So she is Pisa and who was kept in a shopping mall in southern China, living his lonely life on the plastics iceberg, and the animal becomes apathetic, tired, and bored. So this is actually part of the shopping mall. In 2016, NGO Animal Asia exposed and circulated images of Pisa lying on a plastic snowland, showing the world with a specific close-up on his face and his trembling mouth. Pisa has since then been repetitively described by online media as the world's saddest polar bear. So this is the shopping mall. in southern China, along with other Arctic species such as belugas, walruses, Arctic wolves, Arctic foxes, and others, all confined to glass enclosures and tanks, as well as surrounded by fake computer-drawn glacier and bluish neon lighting resembling the Arctic environment in vain. We know this is exaggeratedly artificial and uninhabitable. China's praise for aquariums and animal theme parks started in less than 10 years ago, when there were only about 30 aquariums in 2013, and the number rose to 60 in 2016. Hosting an aquarium in a shopping mall is rationalized by the administrators as a trend to expand sales in the malls when the growing trend of online shopping has threatened China's mall industry. So in order to make people come back physically, so they have them like zoo inside the shopping mall. So of course, I'm not going to accumulate the cruise stories, but of course, recently we have another one in China in Harbin, opened in March 2021. So here's the world's first polar bear hotel, where if you register in one of these hotel rooms, we can look at the polar bears 24 hours. It's really horrible. So after the circulation of PISA's images and the following online petitions to shut down the aquarium and save the polar bear from such condition, other sets of polar bear images also occupy netizens' heart through viral circulation. So in 2015, so there's another image by a photographer who took a picture of a really skinny polar bear somewhere in Finland, and then initiating this discussions about the solid link between the bear's bony state and climate change. So in 2017, a series of images and videos about another skinny polar bear staggering on the iceless land near Baffin was published on social media. So the images were taken by a Canadian wildlife photographer, and people from conservation group Sea Legacy also supported this kind of images being published. According to the photographer, this is a deliberate means to amplify emotional response. Obviously, the number of comments and immediate response on social media have proven it a very successful strategy. And this is also a common exposure strategy of visual dramatization for environmental groups and animal advocates. So these are some of the response by the photographer himself when he was taking the photos and published along with the images themselves. We see all these sentimental descriptions and sensational response from the photographer himself, talking about how sad he see the image, he see the polar bear and then take the image. So after a few days viral circulation of this story, the narrative about the polar bear did not continue. It leaves no trace of anyone's attempt to follow the story, except another group of commentaries that question the causal relationship between climate change and the seemingly starving status of the bear, especially for indigenous people. They would say that the bear is actually skinny because of natural aging, and starving is not necessarily relating to climate change. So here comes to my conclusion or non-conclusion. So the viral images of PISA did not generate as many debates as those of the starving one, because it is crystal clear that the polar bear in the shopping mall is obviously created by human beings, and that the ecological crisis is accelerated by shifting modes of consumerism. The sense of guilt, anger, and blame is well justified by the artificial surrounding. Immediate petitions on global scale were immediately kicked off, probably putting stress on the shopping mall, and PISA was finally sent to another zoo in Tianjin, claiming that was his homecoming reunion with his mother who is staying there. But the fact is, PISA and his mother have not changed their status as animal exhibits. They are now relocated in another aquarium in Tianjin, northern China. And according to the latest update from the National Geographic in 2018, it was reported that PISA is with his mother and looks apparently happier. I cannot be sure whether PISA is really happier now in the new bigger enclosure, but I would be happy and curious to know more if the story continues to be told. Looking at these two images on the left, the two polar bears and the visual discernibility between the world and the cage shows that actually the world is a cage. By thinking about the polar bear as an ecological pharmacon, we can become more aware of the ecological disconnection, which may trigger us to think about how to connect and reconnect. While I have no conclusion about how to do that, I guess some humble curiosity might be helpful to create some compassion instead of apathy. So I guess the kind of rolling out of commentary and continuing the story will be some of the, I think, tactics or whatever to make things more visible or whatsoever. Thank you very much.